Hello and welcome to another informative edition of the Ridgefield Playhouse Diversity Film Series bonus content. I am your host, Cheryl Washington. As always, delighted to be here with you. Today we're going to have an interesting dialogue about the movie Wind River, which has been called the thinking person's thriller. It's got a lot of nuances, a lot of heart to it, and a lot of provocative, interesting material as well. We're going to talk with our guest today, who is Fochik. She's a Chickasaw descendant and advocate for missing and murdered Indigenous women, MMIW, and she's been part of that organization since 2017. Fochik, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so delighted to have you talk about this film.
Mhm. Hi, thank you so much for having me. I've been working for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women USA since 2017, like you said, and I've done a wide variety of different jobs, specific positions for the organization in that time. So I have a lot of experience with this issue and working with MMIW families and being affected by the issue myself personally.
Well, you say personally, so I'd like to ask you, I'm going to take a deep dive right now, if you don't mind. What is the personal connection that you have with it? Did you lose someone or persons?
I have lost somebody. I have lost a two-spirited native relative, a friend of mine, very close friend of mine, like almost as close as family, to hate crime.
Can you, or do you care to go a little bit deeper? Only because I think that it's important for us to understand how it parallels with the movie, if you don't
Mm,
mind. What
um,
happened?
well, my dear friend was targeted for being transgender specifically, but he was living in poverty as a result of many factors, that include his indigenous identity and the historical trauma that was placed on his family as a result of them being an indigenous family. The things that happen there when you are native, the way that you're targeted, and the history there that led to so many native families living in poverty.
What we have learned a lot about what's going on with this culture, if you will, is that oftentimes there are travesties that occur. And because of the women who have been murdered and raped and abused, we find that this is a community that's really overlooked. And we have also found that these travesties have been poorly tracked and also underreported. Can you give us some kind of insight as to why that might happen? Do you have any indication as to why that would even transpire?
Well, to start off, the Native American population in the United States is only 2% of the U.S. population. So that in itself makes us very underrepresented at times. And then you have the systems that the reservation system, boarding school system, that for a very, very long time was intended to erase indigenous voices, erase indigenous identity, erase the cultures, the original cultures and languages and family and social structures of this nation,
Mhm.
the original cultures. All of that was intended to be wiped out. And so that put uh, Native people on the back burner socially, so to speak. um, Most people that I've met personally who aren't Native, a lot of them have not ever met a Native person, especially if you're living in the eastern half of the United States. Um, so, it's been a common experience in my own personal life. And I know, a lot of other Native people can relate to this, that sometimes you meet somebody and you're the first Native person that they ever met. And so most people don't even realize that we're still here. And by default, when you think, oh, well, these people, they're not around anymore, then how could we have problems that are visible to the public and that people would care about? And so with that comes, the data on our communities. Our communities can sometimes be like far removed, rural, tight knit, and maybe afraid to trust because of the way that data has been used to harm Native communities in the past through perpetuating stereotypes and further stigmatizing us and further stigmatizing the things that happens in our communities. All of that together, has created this sort of thing where, the data just hasn't been created
You
in a
talk
lot
about
of
the data.
aspects. And so that
I'm
kind of
sorry.
thing is underreported.
I'm sorry, Fochik. I didn't mean to step on your line. You talk about the data, and as I was researching this, a few things really struck out in terms of the statistics. And I want you to share with us what your observations are regarding them, because what I learned was that Native American women are murdered more than 10 times the national average, which means that they're 10 times more likely to be assaulted or abused than any other group. And why is it that you think that occurs? And why also do you think that this demographic in particular is targeted?
Um, well, we have a multitude of things. And actually, this connects to the movie a bit because this issue was touched on in the movie. If you're living in a community where it's like a reservation, federal jurisdiction community, reservations, they all have difficulty with crimes that happen there, especially major crimes, getting prosecuted, people getting charged and convicted because when a major crime happens, you have to bring in the federal officers. The state that the reservation is in doesn't have jurisdiction. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes into that. So that creates a target where people know they can go to reservations and commit crime. And then the stigma that Native women face because of, biases, racial biases, and others from law enforcement. I've seen law enforcement officers, both rural and urban, dismiss these cases because they see it's a Native woman and they're like, okay, well, that doesn't really matter. That's not a priority. I've seen people say, about a missing woman who got assaulted and, disappeared or was found deceased, they'll say, oh, she was just out partying. I've seen that said about children, even, innocent children who have nothing to do with that kind of lifestyle. We still had that stigma put on them.
Let
And
me ask
so,
you this, do some of
we're
the cases not get reported as missing though? Is that part of the problem though?
that too. Sometimes people don't get reported missing, but even when they do, there, which is, I would say, the majority of the time, people do end up filing a missing person report at some point. It's still an issue that the case, the report gets filed and then nothing happens. So.
The frustration, of course. Let me ask you, since we touched on the movie and we just saw it, as a matter of fact, in the theater, and some people saw it online, what were your impressions of Wind River, and did it touch upon accuracies or inaccuracies? And if there are inaccuracies, share with us what you consider them to be.
Well, I'll start off with the accuracies. So, the fact that they mentioned the issue of man camps, which, of course, towards the end of the movie, you see the man camp where the men have taken this woman and murdered her, and these acts of violence against the women that are occurring there, like the tribal cops have to come in and, they can't really do anything because they're outnumbered. They're not equipped to handle the amount of crime. And then, of course, there's the issue of the federal jurisdiction, the FBI having to come in, all of that. It's true. The FBI does have to come in most time when it's, reservation communities that are being targeted. And man camps do have a very negative impact on the safety of reservation communities. It's, a bunch of people who come in to an area that's not equipped to police that many extra people. And it leads to a lot of exploitation of the community that lives there. So, the crime that comes up when camps are established, it is a real problem. And I really appreciated that Wind River highlighted that and used that as part of the plot. But then when it comes to the FBI coming in and handling these cases, you know, it was very cathartic to see, as a Native woman who's been doing this work, see an FBI agent who really cared, the way that, you know, that character did. You know, she cared about the case, she wanted to solve it, that kind of thing. And that was good, but very much not the way that things ever go. Very seldom you know, these officers really show that much passion about a case. And of course, we don't always see what's behind the scenes, that kind of thing. But it's you know, like, you can just tell that they're either overloaded with cases or they genuinely don't consider it a priority. And that so that's not something that Wind River portrayed accurately, the way that we experience it doing this work and the way that families experience it.
I don't know if this is an unfair question to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Because the film was written and directed by a non-Native American, does that have any impact or influence in terms of how you think? And also, let me ask you this, does it kind of perpetuate the Native American motif, you know, the dying Native American motif?
I think on some level, you know, the way that MMIW stuff tends to work in our communities, MMIP, you know, when someone goes missing, what happens? Usually you'll see aunties and uncles coming together to try and find their loved ones. You know, they'll organize the searches themselves. They'll organize the marches themselves to try and bring awareness. They'll organize the protests. They'll call the police departments and, you know, beg them and harass them until the police will finally give them an answer to whatever question they may have, because usually it takes a lot of runaround just to figure out basic information. And so it's the community all doing this work, you know? It's not really outsiders that often at all. And I think that, you know, given that the movie was written by someone who's a non-native, you know, there's this kind of attitude, well, what would be like an ideal situation to me? You know, that's probably, you know, of course that's what's coming up in the writing process. And so, you know, it kind of pulls in this, you know, some people call it white saviorship of, you know, the non-native characters coming in and saving the day, and acting like, you know, our communities aren't capable of aiding in these situations, when, you know, of course, really it's that our communities are trying our best to fill in the gaps and, you know, make sure that the attention to these cases and the care that these families need and the care that these victims need is still there, even though, you know, the federal government system or state government system, what have you, isn't prioritizing the cases and isn't treating people the way they deserve to be treated. It's our communities doing that work. And someone from outside of the Native community, of course, it doesn't surprise me at all that they wouldn't see that necessarily.
How has social media been able to have your organization and others disseminate information so that there is, in fact, more awareness about what's taking place?
So hashtags and sharing posts and all of this kind of stuff has made a huge difference, because you kind of help bring awareness to people who might not have seen it before, especially as, like, for example, MMIWSA's page has gained so much traction, such a huge audience. You know, every time that audience grows, that one person will tell somebody else about the issue for the first time, you know? And so it just keeps growing and growing. And that's actually, you know, I think that was a major factor in what got a movie like Wind River made, even though ultimately it didn't accurately portray the way, you know, our communities kind of, it's us that's doing the work, it's the grassroots efforts. You know, it made someone want to look into that enough to make a movie about it. So social media has enabled us to organize on a level that, hasn't really been done in the past. People from all over can find information in a way that, is unprecedented, basically. And so it's certainly helped to spread awareness.
Has it helped in terms of the tribal police, for example, on the reservations with the information that's being disseminated based on what's taking place with some of these murders and these abuses?
I can't necessarily speak on that too well because you have well over 570 recognized tribes in the United States now, and every department is using resource in a different way. Similarly to non-tribal police departments, not every police department has a super active social media page or that kind of thing. And, of course, police department Facebook pages aren't like they don't draw a bunch of attention. They don't draw a huge audience, so it's just kind of like a local thing, what have you. But for spreading information to people in communities, I certainly think it helps.
What do the numbers look like right now? How are we playing into that? Are the numbers, I hate to say, I hope they're lessening, because we don't want to see a community that's going to be affected by this kind of criminalization. But what do the numbers tell us? What do they indicate right now?
Well, WSA, we have a data project. MMIWSA's data project has been going on since 2019. And as it's become more sophisticated, there is a margin of error where it's like, okay, it's a little bit hard to tell for sure whether or not numbers have been increasing. But, as times get harder financially, that's a big part of it. People become more vulnerable to exploitation and more vulnerable to situations in which they're abused because, like, they have no other choice. That kind of thing. I believe that, COVID and all of that, financial hardships that have come up, they have played a role in numbers increasing, and that's what we've seen. So, we usually see, including cases where people were found safe, over 700 cases a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's an encouragement, if we can put it that way. Now, let me ask you this. What can people do to help support MMIW, to help spread the awareness even further? What would be the quintessential item that you would mention that just the average Joe and Jane could do?
So my biggest thing, there's so many things. We want Native communities to be listened to. So looking to tribal authorities, asking them what they need in order for their community to have the issue of MMIW properly, served, properly addressed, all of that. Asking tribal communities what they need is a huge one, because every tribal community is different. I can't speak on others, but I've seen doing this work, a wide variety of different needs, a wide variety of different kinds of issues. And, it's all regional or, tied to the specific history of that tribe, what have you, that kind of thing. So, making sure that tribal voices are uplifted, tribal governments have the power to say, hey, we, are going to stop this from happening on our land. That's a big thing. So making sure resources are available. And sometimes it takes legislation. I would say a lot of the time it takes legislation to make that happen. Make sure the resources are there and everything. That's a big part of it. So pushing for the legislation that needs to happen, asking lawmakers to become educated on the issue, educating yourself and educating the people around you, and also supporting Native communities through like financial support, supporting Native businesses when there are job opportunities. People aren't as vulnerable to different kinds of trafficking. They aren't as vulnerable to abuse that happens because of poverty. So uplifting Native businesses, uplifting, the communities just as a whole in every aspect can really help. And talking about the issue and making sure that police departments all over the United States, not just tribal police, not just the FBI, but that every department is taking their missing persons cases seriously and is properly handling them.
Making them much more accountable then.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Fochik, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. We got a lot out of you, and I'm so appreciative for you stepping in to have this discussion with us. We needed this dialogue for sure. So I want to thank you, Fochik, who's an advocate for the missing and murdered Indigenous women. You've been with them since 2017. I hope that you will continue so we can get these numbers down. We thank you for your advocacy, and we thank you for your activism for sure. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to thank our sponsors for our diversity film series, bonus content, the Aquarion Water Company, as always doing such a great job in helping us to raise awareness and to promote and increase that kind of information across the board. I'm Cheryl Washington, and I will see you on the next edition of our diversity film series bonus content.